August 2004, Rilo Kiley released their third album, More Adventurous. I had just turned 19 and was heading off to college. A couple weeks after it came out, I went to a chain store to buy it on something called a CD with something called money, which is how we used to have to get our music. Though I admit that was kind of retro even in 2004. After the introduction of file sharing at the turn of the millennium, the line between mainstream and indie was eroding fast. It didn't have anything to do with record labels or a working ethos anymore, so it became a loose umbrella term for a cluster of sounds, just like alternative had done in the 90s. Rilo Kiley were part of a ruling class of popular bands that were floating around in this expanding gray area. Death Cab for Cutie, Slash, The Postal Service, Bright Eyes, The Shins, Spoon. None of this stuff ever made it to radio, but there was a sense that it could have given the right climate. This was also when young artists became a lot less guarded about licensing their songs, so you could hear these bands in a lot of movies and TV shows. Few more than Rilo Kiley. Jenny Lewis and Blake Sennett had both been child actors in LA, yes, but More Adventurous was a tentative major label album, and they had commercial ambitions. It never worked out because they never stuck with a sound long enough to let it mature. History, the music press, and the band themselves have all gone through several revisions as to who Rilo Kiley were and what they were supposed to represent. Brainy indie darlings, Laurel Canyon folkies, pop star wannabes, Midwest transplants who still had working class cred, the new Dolly Parton, high school emo for kids on LiveJournal. Some of these made more sense than others, but let's be honest. Rilo Kiley didn't know how to play to their strengths, and they were stuck in a permanent identity crisis. Critics were always divided on them. Pitchfork gave More Adventurous a kind of hedging 6.7 review, but Robert Christgau called it one of 2004's best releases. With the benefit of hindsight, and, considering the failed romance between Blake Sennett and Jenny Lewis, plus the massive fame and mommy baggage that came with the kid actor thing, you can start to see this album and Rilo Kiley's entire catalog as one big therapy session. Young fans connect to and get very passionate about that kind of emoting, but critics don't. That's why the latest round of historical repositioning has turned them into a kind of emo band. You have to find a way to resolve their intense fandom with their historical irrelevance. I liked this record a lot at 19. I didn't have any relationship drama I could project onto it, and it would be several more years before I started figuring out my own neuroses, so I may have been one of the few people who took it as just music. How does it sound to me now, over a decade later? Well, it doesn't sound as dated as I thought it would. More Adventurous was the turning point, when everyone figured out that Jenny Lewis's voice was the best thing they had going for them, and even then, there are as many bad songs as good ones. Skip It's a Hit and Does He Love You right off the bat. One is a shamefully bad attempt at political commentary, and the other is some kind of overblown LA melodrama. The record really should begin with Portions for Foxes. Solid power pop single. The acoustic songs on the back half of the record, which were my favorites in 2004, still feel the most natural and comfortable. The Absence of God and the title track are both straightforward, pretty, emotional, and they use Jenny Lewis's voice to their advantage. She's not trying to be Whitney Houston here. The best Rilo Kiley songs were always the ones with a hint of self-deprecation. And one of the big problems with More Adventurous is that they lost their sense of humor. It's all sadness and anger and no attempt to get much perspective beyond that. Think of it this way. Production-wise, you have a lot of cheery bells and horns and acoustic guitars trying to balance out the weepy pedal steel and orchestra strings. The lyrical equivalent of that balance doesn't exist. It's a Hit tries to get snarky laughs, like I said, and it gets lost in a fog of self-righteousness. This record is a perfect example of that thing that happens to indie bands when they move to a major label, where they want to make appealing poppy music without feeling like they've gone all light and shallow. Rilo Kiley were less stubborn about it than some bands, but you can sense their discomfort here. There's very little nuance on More Adventurous, politically, emotionally, intellectually, which is a big part of the appeal it had for lots of people my age when we were teens. It goes big on everything. That makes it easy to feel rebonded to this music when you revisit it, but I also can't help feeling that it speaks less and less to me and about me the older I get. Today, I think this record is a totem for people who are especially prone to nostalgia or who always want to hang on to a little piece of their teenage selves. It can be a portal to that. Rilo Kiley was over the day Jenny Lewis decided to release a solo album. The writing was on the wall, Under the Blacklight was garbage front to back, and they were never going to be a real major label success. More Adventurous is their best sounding album, and probably their most well-liked. But there's no way anyone who didn't like it back then would get into it now.